Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, folks. It's the one and only V, the Guerrilla Economist, and we have none other than the man of the hour himself, Harley Schlanger. Harley needs no introduction to any of our audiences. And folks, you can check him out on LaRouchePack.com or theschillerinstitute.org, theschillerinstitute.org. And with that being said, Harley, how are you?
I'm doing great, V. It's good to talk with you.
It's always a pleasure, my man. It's always a pleasure to have you on. Oh, there's a lot going on. The situation in Europe, in the EU. I spoke briefly about it this morning with Italy. This is a big thing. Helga Zepp LaRouche is going to be meeting with some of the finance ministers over there. Xi Jinping's visit is right around the corner. Are we seeing Marco Polo returning to the Silk Road, Harley? That is the question.
Well, I think that's a good way to look at it.
Yeah.
But I think this is a dead serious operation because the Italians have been under the thumb of the European Union banking regulations, finance regulations, budgetary restrictions, and it's destroying the Italian economy. And that's
Yeah.
why these two parties, the Five Star Movement and the Lega, became the largest vote getters and became the government. And they're not backing down in a fight with the EU. The two parties disagree on certain things, like the Five Star Movement is anti infrastructure. But one thing they agree on is that Europe needs new options. And among these, the Prime Minister Conte, who has a very good relationship with President Trump, is calling for the lifting of sanctions against Russia.
Right.
And now this week it was announced, or the end of last week, that Italy may sign a memo of understanding with China to join the Belt and Road Initiative. Now, there are already 150 some nations that have agreements with China on one degree or another, up to and including memos of understanding to join the new Silk Road program, the Belt and Road Initiative. But Italy is one of the G7 countries. It's one of the more advanced industrial economies in the world, even after being savaged by the European Union. And if they go ahead and do this, in spite of pressure from the EU to not do it, and also pressure from the State Department, the insane neocons in the State Department and National Security Council, Bolton's crowd, are saying this is a threat to Europe. And the Italians are saying, how is this a threat to Europe? China's going to invest anyway in Europe. Why not join with them and take advantage of the potential for expanding trade to the east and in between? So this is extremely important. And by the way, V, the other thing that the Italian government is working on is they've set up what they're calling a roundtable for a discussion of implementing Glass-Steagall bank separation in Italy. Again, this would violate European Union regulations. My friend who's been on your program a couple times, Marco Zanni, who's a leader in the what used to be the opposition but is now the government parties in Italy. He's a member of the European Parliament. He came to the United States with a list of over 200 elected officials in Italy who support Glass-Steagall banking regulation. So if the Italians do that, with Brexit still hanging as I mean, who knows what it's hanging as these days, whether it's a threat or a promise or whatever. But the whole banking situation in Italy and Europe as a whole is chaotic. There are rumors every day about what's going to happen with Deutsche Bank. Will they merge with Commerzbank, which is probably the favorite option of the German government, because that way they can do a bailout through Commerzbank without it seeming like a German government bailout. But the German government is basically the major stockholder in Commerzbank. So it would be a bailout, which would violate EU rules, but they're trying to figure out a way around it. So things are hopping in Europe. The elections for the European Parliament are coming up in May. The establishment parties are completely hysterical because they figure that this revolt is going to continue. So I think it's going to be very interesting, and we'll see what happens when Xi Jinping comes on the 21st to Rome and to visit Italy.
Yeah, it's going to be momentous. I mean, I love how some of the U.S. national security people have said. I forgot the exact name of the individual, but he says China's predatory lending practices are not going to benefit the people of Italy. And I had to literally fall off my chair laughing, Harley. Literally falling off my chair laughing. Because after all, our what the Anglo-American power structure had to offer, what the deep state, what these globalists have to offer the world is the IMF and the World Bank. Then their predatory practice. And if you don't like it, well, we just removed you from power. We replaced you with a puppet government or a puppet regime. We set off some false flags, and then we pillaged your nation. That's what we did. And when you and I started talking about the Silk Road and we started discussing about the emerging multipolar world, there are all maybe about 27, maybe 30 countries that are signed up to it. People don't realize there are north of 150 some odd countries that have already signed up willingly, without even one bullet being fired, without any force, without any coercion. 150 some odd countries that have already signed up to the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative. And this is what stands as a stupor to the bomb and destroy empire of chaos globalists. Harley, they can't wrap their minds and their brains around how can you do mutually beneficial trade agreements and profitable business deals without the force of coercion or at the end of a gun. It's remarkable.
Here's the most interesting irony to it. In the West, the transatlantic system from Brussels to Europe and in the United States, there's ample money available if you are going to put it into a speculative bubble. That's what the quantitative easing policy that they're going back toward. The European Central Bank has said they have to go back to quantitative easing because growth has slowed in Europe. Well, growth is below zero in Europe right now. And we're seeing a retrenchment coming in the United States. The idea that we somehow triggered a recovery because of the tax cut is going to be proven to be a myth, and I hope Trump figures it out in time to do something about it. But you're right. In the West, we have lending for speculators. What China is doing and what they're doing with their partners, including, by the way, American allies such as Japan and South Korea and India, are going into Africa with loans which do not have conditions attached. And they don't need conditions because the loans are going into physical production, into infrastructure, transport, energy. Whereas in the West, we loan money to pay off old debt. And all that does is increase the indebtedness. So I have to laugh. And by the way, some of the Rogue listeners, Rogue Money listeners occasionally write comments about how China is setting up a debt trap. I just don't think they understand that if you talk to African leaders and ask them, are you submitting to a debt trap? They laugh and they say, we can control what we're doing. China isn't telling us where to invest the money. They're working with us to build things. And that's what we want. And they said the debt trap is what Europe used to do. So the very people accusing China of setting up debt traps are the ones that use debt traps to keep the nations of Africa unsovereign and under colonial style enforcement through the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. So it's one of these ironies that I wish people would actually study the real stories here instead of going along with what they hear from CNBC and the mainstream so-called economists.
Exactly correct. Exactly correct. Harley, switching foot here, the Mueller investigation. Is this ever going to end? It was supposed to be last Friday. It's still continuing. It's this week. What's going on?
Well, the big thing that's going on is they're probably trying to figure out how to avoid massive hysteria on the part of the anti-Trumpers when they release a report which they will probably hype as showing all kinds of crimes, but lacking any content. One of the symptoms of this was Nancy Pelosi coming out yesterday saying that she's not going for impeachment unless there's something that they haven't already seen. Well, there's nothing that they haven't already seen. There's nothing there. This has been an operation from the beginning, not to protect America from Russian meddling or Trump corruption, but to stop Trump from reversing the policies of the Bush, Clinton, Obama years. And Trump has continued on a number of fronts to reverse those policies, but he's been limited by the fact that he can't talk to Putin because of the Russiagate scandal. His ties to China have been severely limited by imbeciles like Marco Rubio, who, you want to talk about racism. Anyone Rubio sees who looks Oriental, he assumes is a spy. I mean, he wants to shut down the Confucius Institutes, which do something so subversive as teaching Chinese to Americans. So we're seeing the insanity coming out in US policy. And what happens when the Mueller report is either released or not released, but there's nothing damaging in it? Well, we'll realize that 2 years were wasted chasing phantoms. And hopefully, Trump will say the reason for this was to stop me from doing what I was elected to do. I think what's really crucial, V, is that clarity has to come out on this.
Yes.
That the McConnells, the Paul Ryans, the Republicans who are sabotaging Trump, and largely the Bush networks, Mitt Romney, people like that,
Yep.
and the whole Clinton-dominated, Obama-dominated Democratic Party, they launched this with full direction coming from Britain and British intelligence to keep the old geopolitical imperial order in business. And Trump doesn't like that order. Now, whether he fully understands the potential if the US would join the Belt and Road Initiative, I couldn't tell you. But he certainly seems intent on improving relations with China, with Russia, working together with countries such as Japan and South Korea, as in what they're doing to solve the problem in North Korea. There are some other areas where he needs some tweaks. I think he's very much right on Europe. Europe, as it's currently going, is a rudderless ship heading into an iceberg. And why would we want to get tightly intertwined with them? So Trump is, in a sense, he's rejected the old paradigm. He's not fully in the new paradigm. And I blame that not so much on Trump, but on Charles Schumer, the Democrats in the Congress, Adam Schiff, these guys, and the media in the United States, which has been lying for 2.5 years now.
Exactly. Harley, also the situation on the Korean Peninsula is very interesting. We've had the fake mainstream media already trumpeting, oh, look, the North Koreans are rebuilding their ballistic missile facilities. And then a week right after, they were literally crowing like roosters, crowing like hens about this rebuilding of the missile capability of North Korea. It has come out that no, they're not in fact doing that. They're actually doing the opposite. What is the current situation on the Korean Peninsula? If you can comment on that very quickly.
Well, these talks about satellite photos showing that the North Koreans are preparing for a missile launch reminds me of Colin Powell taking a picture of a taco truck in the Iraqi desert, saying this was a chemical weapons lab.
Yes, it was. They were making. They were making hot kebabs.
Yeah. I mean, what you have is an order that doesn't want to give up wars. We see it in Syria. We see it with Bolton, who's continuing to say, well, we will withdraw, but. And Trump is saying we're going to withdraw. He's got the military, at least key elements in the military, working with him on that. There's very good cooperation going on now between the Russians and the Americans. The people in the State Department and the national security agencies that are putting pressure on Turkey, they're turning Turkey into a total Russian ally. Now, that in itself wouldn't be so bad because Russia would like to be allied with us. So we're caught between two paradigms. I think the way people have to look at this, instead of getting down on Trump for the swamp creatures who are still gnawing at him and undercutting his policy, there's an attempt to make a dramatic shift away from a failed and disastrous 25-year detour in American history. If you go back to Reagan, with all his flaws, what Reagan wanted to do was to share new technologies with Russia, starting with the Strategic Defense Initiative. And this was designed to end the era of mutual and assured destruction. And it was sabotaged by Democrats in the United States, by neocons like the Bush family in the United States, and by Gorbachev, who didn't want to do it. The interesting point that I'd like to make for people here is that whole idea of Reagan to share the technology of the Strategic Defense Initiative which he said would make nuclear weapons impotent and obsolete. And to do it with Russia, that was his peace through strength idea. The strength was there to get peace. That was Reagan's goal. And that's why he brought in Lyndon LaRouche. And many of your listeners know that LaRouche passed away exactly a month ago today, and don't really know what to think of him because the media has treated LaRouche in the same way or even worse than they have Trump. But the fact is that LaRouche's ideas from the early 80s shaped a potential era of mutual assured survival, shared technologies. LaRouche was the original author of the idea of what he called at the time the Eurasian Land Bridge, which Xi Jinping adopted in 2013 as the New Silk Road, as the Belt and Road Initiative. We laid this out. I mean, I was campaigning for this in the 1980s in Texas. You know, the idea that we could increase world trade, we could increase cooperation based on the idea that there are the common interests of mankind, which are more important than the deviant desires of the Wall Street, City of London imperial faction. And so now we've come, 35 years later to the point where the New Silk Road is reality. As you point out, 150 plus nations are joining. The Western economies are sinking. And when you get to this question of the Korean Peninsula, who's working on it together? Trump has done something which no one ever expected. He's gotten the Russians, the Chinese, the Japanese, and the South Koreans to work with him. And that's why it's working for North Korea. It's not just a threat of annihilation and then saying, if we won't annihilate you if you get rid of your nuclear weapons. Trump is saying, we'll connect you to the Silk Road. And this is something Kim Jong-un wants. Now, another example of this, V, is what's happening between India and Pakistan, where you have a terror operation that was probably triggered out of the city of London that killed almost 40 Indian security forces, that nearly led to a new shooting war. Who intervened? Russia, China, and Donald Trump. And the Russians have praised Trump for quietly going in and lending his support to the kinds of talks that are cooling the situation down. So we see this potential of the new paradigm. What if the United States works together with Russia, China, Japan, South Korea, economies that are growing because they're investing not in stock market bubbles, but in physical production, adding value to their economies, increasing the productivity of labor, eliminating poverty. Why don't we do that? And I think that's the direction Trump would like to go in. But we've got to defeat this criminal elite that still run the US, that control the media, that control many of the institutions of government. And I think between now and 2020, we're going to have an opportunity to crush them. And one thing I'd urge your listeners to do is to go to the LaRouche PAC website. And we have a petition there to exonerate Lyndon LaRouche. And the reason that we want to do this is that, first of all, he was jailed in a corrupt operation run by two people who are very much in the news today. William Weld, who's announced that he's going to run for president against Trump in the Republican primary, and the person who is his assistant in this, Robert S. Mueller. They were the ones who ran the Get LaRouche task force, which eventually put Lyndon LaRouche in prison. And they did it through the same kind of lie and slander and innuendo and corrupting the jury pool. And LaRouche was eventually convicted of what? Conspiracy to defraud the IRS. Sound familiar? Nothing to do with the original charges against him. The original charge against him came from the British. They said LaRouche was a Soviet agent trying to infiltrate the Reagan administration. So we're asking people to join us in a campaign to exonerate Mr. LaRouche, not for his sake. I mean, he, as we know, he's passed on now, and he passed on with full dignity because he never submitted to these threats against him. But justice for LaRouche would mean justice for Trump. It would mean justice for the policy that LaRouche outlined to restore American manufacturing and American farms and the classical culture that really was an underpinning of making this country great. So if people can take the time to go to LaRouchePAC.com, you may have to type into the search engine there, LaRouche exoneration, but read the petition, sign it, and circulate it. It's the best thing people can do to free Trump from the same network that's trying to destroy his presidency and the United States with it.
Absolutely. Very well said. Harley, thank you so much for joining us and sharing this very vital, very important update with us, because it's very important for people to keep up to date and abreast of global events, real events, events that are event driven, so to speak, and that are forming and putting and bringing forth the new multipolar world and how we are all going to fit in it. It's very vital. And folks, I urge you to follow Harley's work. Go to theschillerinstitute.org, theschillerinstitute.org. I also urge you to join the LaRouche PAC. Go to LaRouchePAC.com. Sign up and join. Show your support. Be part of the solution and be more politically engaged now more than ever.
And V, people can reach me if they want to talk to me or ask me questions, can reach me directly at harleysch@gmail.com. It's better than just leaving a little comment on the YouTube page, although that's useful also. But harleysch@gmail.com, and I'll get you a link to my blog page if you write to me.
Awesome. Fantastic. Harley, thank you so much. Folks, have a wonderful day.